I don't think that their approach to defense has been good, and I think that's something that they need to change. I think that if they do that, I do think Bridges can completely adequately do the job. I think he's done an excellent job in one-on-one scenarios. I think he's done a poor job when he's been screened, and that's what he struggled with the most is his screen navigation. And if they just switch more, it'll resolve that issue almost immediately. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, he is my brilliant co-host, Geoff. Geoff, we are talking New York Knicks today. We have a lot to discuss. There's a lot of panicking going on in the Knicks world. I don't think it's time to panic, but I think we do have to talk about a couple of gigantic elephants in the room and some significant disagreements I have been having with Knicks fans and analysts. I think you as well. But first, before we start, Geoff, I wanted to take a minute to celebrate and appreciate our listeners. Thanks to all the listeners, we have finally now crossed the 1,000 subscriber mark after our most recent podcast. You guys all helped us do this super quickly after we mentioned how close we were to that goal. We completely blew through it, and we really appreciate it. Geoff and I, started Hot Hand Theory just because we appreciated and respected each other's analysis and the way we thought about the game. And we were like, hey, I remember having this conversation hey, if no one listens, that's fine. But we have a lot to chat about and add to the conversation. And, we have a lot to say that's not really being said elsewhere. And honestly, the reception that we've gotten has been beyond anything that I could have imagined. So, definitely want to thank everyone for that. Geoff, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I just really appreciative to everyone. It's been a great year. It reminds me of, I don't know if you ever read Fire Joe Morgan back in the day, back in the Deadspin days, but Fire Joe Morgan was started because it was just a couple friends who liked to make each other laugh, just send each other emails of dumb shit people said, and they would just go back and forth, and they didn't expect anybody to read, and then it became one of the biggest websites in the world. And then two of the writers ended up writing for sitcoms and stuff. So, maybe that's not our trajectory, but I do think the origins are kind of similar of just we love talking basketball together. We respect each other's opinions. And yeah, I mean, it's so cool that so many people not agree, because we don't want people to just baselessly agree with us, but whether they agree or disagree, they stick around, they engage with us, they know that we'll discuss in good faith. And I think that's the most important thing, because nobody's going to agree all the time. We don't want to just be this propaganda channel that pushes our perspective. We know we're wrong. Sometimes we're going to be wrong. That's human nature. It would be crazy of us to only platform opinions of people who agree with us or people who think like us. Our goal is to engage with everybody and try to figure out what the actual answers are. And our bet was that there are more people like us than who want to just go somewhere and listen to people who agree with them. And so far, the results are really good. So thank you to people who continue to tune in.
Yeah, I think that's a great assessment and summary. And on that note, let's talk about some disagreements that are going on and see if we can get to the bottom of things. So Geoff, I mentioned this to you before we started. I really wanted to open by talking about this conversation as it relates to the Knicks about advantage creation and the Knicks' ability to create three-point attempts. Because I think there's been at least a lot of talk, in my opinion, more than probably is needed, about the Knicks kind of needing Randall and advantage creation after their most recent game, the loss to the Indiana Pacers. And I think, in my opinion, there's some conflation that's happening. So I want to give my perspective on it. So first, to clarify, I think this is really important. When I talk about the importance of shooting threes, I don't think threes are the goal of the offense. I think 3-point attempts are never the goal of an offense. The goal of the offense is higher efficiency shots than you are giving up, right? That's the goal. So you want to give up lower efficiency shots than you take on average. The most efficient shots are not 3-point shots. They are uncontested or poorly contested shots at the rim. Those are the shots that you want. Threes, why I love threes and why I think they're so important, because they are the strongest penalty or punishment for the defense taking away good shots at the rim. that's the biggest punishment. The biggest punishment can't be a mid-range shot because the defense would live with that. Advantages come from putting the defense in a position where they're put in a dilemma where they have to choose between, oh, do I give up this highly efficient shot or this highly efficient shot? That's where you get an advantage, because then they have to make a choice. And what constitutes a highly efficient shot is contingent on the environment. Geoff, you and I have talked about this as well. Offenses now, we're in an offensive environment where offenses are so much more efficient overall. There's more data. There's better players on average across the league. That means that defenses now are more inclined to give up shots that they used to not want to give up, that they used to want to take away in the past, because the penalty for taking away those shots is way greater than it used to be. Now, the penalty is an open three, and an open three by a good shooter who's going to knock them down at a really high clip. That's the biggest penalty you can offer in the current game. So people are saying the Knicks need another advantage creator. I just am like, what does that even mean? What player is going to force teams into a situation where they'd rather give up an open three to a good shooter than have that player isolate or score individually better than the current players that they have on the roster? If you think, in my opinion, if you think Julius Randle is drawing double teams constantly against these teams who have clearly prioritized not letting the Knicks shoot open threes because they recognize the elite shooting that they have, I just don't see that. And furthermore, the last thing I want to say before I kick it to you is I would be more likely to agree or at least be more open to that idea if they had Randle and Towns. If it was Randle, it would be Randle in the lineup for Josh. Like if it was Randle in the lineup for Josh Hart, then that'd be a great offense. You would definitely be able to create more advantages. It'd be Randle in the lineup for Towns. And if someone tells me that the spacing would be better because DiVincenzo would start over Hart, I will literally throw my computer out the window and I'll just move into the middle of nowhere and I'll just live off the grid, because if that's the case, then Deuce McBride would just be starting. I don't see the significant difference in terms of what DiVincenzo brings relative to Deuce McBride. I do see a difference, but not such that in the circumstance where Randle's the rim protector at the 5, DiVincenzo would start, but Deuce can't start when Karl-Anthony Towns is a rim protector at the 5. But anyway, I digress. That's my initial kind of thought about like advantage creation, and I just want to hear what you think about that, Geoff.
Well, first of all, and this isn't your point at all, I think there's a more significant gap between DiVincenzo and Deuce than you do as shooters.
No. I think there's a significant gap between DiVincenzo and Deuce as shooters. Yeah, I meant on the net in terms of Deuce's defense and in terms of having a shooter with Randle and having a shooter with Towns. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my bad. Okay, I misunderstood what you said. I thought you were talking about just them as spacers and the gravity.
No. Significant difference in terms of Deuce's aggression. I mean, DiVincenzo's aggression and range shooting.
Yeah, my bad. I'm glad we clarified that. You gave me and the listeners a lot of good stuff to think about there. This is tough because I think what we're learning about these Knicks players right now is OG, Bridges, Towns even. Towns is a good passer, really good passer for relative to his position. These are very, very static three-point shooters. They have not done much of anything to create advantages for the team. That they're any of the good things that these people are doing in this specific department has been started elsewhere, at least for the most part. A lot falls on Brunson's shoulders. A lot of the drawing two defenders to the ball to get that domino effect started starts with Brunson. Sometimes I guess they leaned on it a little bit more yesterday. They tried to get Towns going inside or Towns going with a head of steam to draw a second defender. But for the most part, anytime you've seen the defenses put in rotation, it started and ended with Brunson. So I think where people whose perspectives are that the Knicks need someone to help draw a second defender, it's coming from a place of Bridges and OG Anunoby especially are bottom of the barrel types in terms of getting that getting that going, getting the defense put in rotation. They're not doing anything to help in that department. They are good open 3-point shooters, especially from the corners. OG Anunoby has expanded a little bit. He's shooting more above the break this year. He's shooting more slightly contested threes this year, at least by my eye test. I'm not 100% sure that's true statistically, but just from watching, it does seem like he's hunting these threes more. But Bridges, the differences are stark. He is elite from the corners, and he is struggling above the break, and he is not shooting the super contested threes. And so that's tough. That puts a lot on Brunson's plate, and we talked about this last week. We just saw the Knicks play the Pacers. Brunson versus Halliburton, a very, very highly contested rivalry with two players who profile extremely differently. And we saw what the size that Halliburton does, or excuse me, the size that Halliburton has, and the types of passing angles he creates. We saw what that does for a team, because they really only have one true advantage creator. And I don't think anybody would argue that Halliburton by himself is a better advantage creator than Brunson. He is heavily reliant on a screen. He's really good at leveraging and manipulating screens. He rejects screens all the time, but he needs someone to come set a screen for him to get him that head of steam. Whereas Brunson, in isolation, he's going to draw a second defender. He's going to dust you. His jab step is lethal. So the Knicks are already working with an advantage in advantage creation when it comes to Brunson versus Halliburton. But Halliburton's size, his passing, that by him in and of itself, that's all they need, really. Siakam, it's not like they're leaning on Siakam for all these ISOs. They don't use Siakam like the Knicks want to use Randall. It's Halliburton and role players, essentially. And sometimes at the end of shot clock, they'll feed Halliburton they'll feed Siakam in the mid post. But so if you're going to talk about how the Knicks need more on their roster to create advantages, I don't see it, because we just saw the Pacers play. The Pacers create advantages and create three-pointers as good as anybody. And it's with one major advantage creator who I think a lot of Knicks fans would argue isn't as good an advantage creator as the guy the Knicks have. So what's the disconnect here?
Yeah, I largely agree with a lot of that. The one thing I'll say is I do think the way that the Knicks defended Halliburton and the Pacers actually really played into Halliburton's ability to create advantages. Like, they were sort of like giving advantages. And for people who don't recognize like how important I think it is to not give the offense advantages, I am someone who effectively thinks you should never double team. And we talked about this early last year. I don't forget what game was it Utah, where they were just double teaming Kevin Durant towards the end of the game. I don't remember what it was, but there was some game we were talking about, and they were just giving doubles. And I'm just like, this is terrible defense. When you just give double teams, you're effectively saying you're creating offense for your opponent. This is something I've gone on rants about. I think it's awful. I don't know a scenario where I even think like a true just bringing two to the ball, not like stunting and recovering, not trapping and getting in rotation, not the different types of switching dynamics. Just a true double team, I think it is terrible defense, and I would never condone that.
Yeah, we saw that in the Kings game last year.
Yeah.
That was embarrassing defense. I remember rewatching that. A month or so ago, because we were talking about Josh Hart. And I was like, oh, let's see what Josh Hart does as the roller, him setting screens. And then I rewatched that game, and I was like, what the fuck are the Kings doing? Why did they do this?
Yeah.
They were just like, it's the old adage, like, it's when they talk about like LeBron, and they're like, turn him into a scorer. And it's like, well, yeah, like, if just don't needlessly double off him, because he's going to create, like, that's why LeBron has basically exploited that strategy his whole career. Of people being like, well, whatever we do, we're not going to let LeBron beat us. We're going to send double, and it's like, you're letting LeBron beat you. That he's not an idiot. He's not gonna take a tougher shot. He's gonna find an open shooter. That's what makes him great. That's what Jokic does. You have to, and okay, so to your point, you don't double Siakam in the post because you don't like the size advantage that he has. You live with him dusting you 2 points at a time
Right.
at a 55% clip. That's good. That's good long-term offense. That's what you do. Like, that's, even if Siakam's final line ends up looking good, you know, he's got 40 points on 15 of 28 shooting.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's fine.
had what a great game. That's fine for your team. That's a good result for your team.
The Knicks, the way that their philosophy, I don't think is like follows this. So that's especially defensively, and that's some of the problems that we've seen. They are playing when there's Halliburton, Turner, pick and rolls with Bridges and Cat as the defenders. They are playing in drop almost exclusively. Like, isn't the whole idea from Knicks fans and from a lot of the NBA community that Halliburton can't beat guys one-on-one and that's his weakness? Why are you playing in a drop that's giving him the exact advantage that he wants? Why is it Halliburton and Ben Shepherd pick and pop and you have Brunson in a drop? Why can't Brunson switch on to Halliburton? Can't Halliburton not beat guys one-on-one? I'm so confused. But they're just I think the game is moving more towards go ahead and isolate. Go ahead and try to take guys one-on-one. Do it. Like, if you're not prime James Harden and drawing a foul every single time, and the consequences are either I draw a foul or I step back and hit a three, then go ahead, isolate. You know, if you're not Luka Doncic, then go ahead, isolate. These guys are, and that's what teams are doing to the Knicks, and the Knicks are not doing it to other teams. So, of course, the other teams are totally comfortable with giving up whatever points per possession that the Knicks are getting because they're scoring so much. It's a easy. This is a perfect segue because I do have to go on one more rant, and this is like a bigger rant in my opinion. People continue to say that the Knicks offense is not a problem because they have a very good offensive rating. Offense is not played in a vacuum. And it's really interesting because I just feel like people think that data, quote unquote, data and analytics folks like over rely on numbers. And I always dispute this. And I feel like now some more non-analytically inclined people are currently over relying on the numbers and ignoring the context, which is, it's interesting. I will give an example. This is going to be an exaggerated hypothetical. So please forgive me. This is not a perfect example, but I think it's an example that illustrates the point. Imagine, Geoff, and everybody listening, imagine if basketball games were structured where the Knicks opponent played 100 possessions of offense on Tuesday, and then the Knicks played 100 possessions of offense on Wednesday, right? Like that, they took turns. One day they're all defense, the other day they're all offense. It would be entirely dependent on the outcome from Tuesday, how the opponent played defense against the Knicks the following day, if that makes sense. So if the opponent scored 125 points on Tuesday, then the next day when the Knicks are on offense, they would be totally happy for the Knicks to take a bunch of wide open mid-range shots. Why? Because it's going to be so difficult for the Knicks to be efficient enough on those shots to score enough points to surpass the point total that the other team has. So on the other hand, if the opponent of the Knicks only scored 110 points, they may be more reluctant to give up those shots because it's relatively easier to surpass that point total on wide open mid-range shots. Obviously, basketball is not played this way, but it is played within a context. There is a running tally of the time and the score throughout the game. If the offense is getting whatever they want, they're going to give you whatever relatively low efficiency twos that you want. Julius Randle scored 0.94 points per possession on ISOs last season. If the Pacers are getting 3-pointers every time down, they would give Randle whatever twos he wanted. I don't see why he would create more of an advantage. An analogy in baseball would be, when a team plays the infield back with a runner on third and less than 2 outs, when they have a big lead, they do that because they're willing to trade the higher probability of the run for the higher probability of an out. That's a trade-off they're making. Or in football, it's more obvious in football. When a team has a big lead and they play prevent defense, it's because they're willing to trade more yardage and a greater chance of scoring eventually for not only time on the clock, but also a lower probability of their opponent scoring more points, because if they're able to score quicker, it allows for more opportunities for the opponent to score. We always talk about, you and I, Geoff, always talk about prioritizing the macro instead of the micro, looking at the bigger picture, If you're scoring extra meaningless runs all the time because it increases the opponent's win probability, it doesn't mean that you have a great offense because you average one more run per game than you would have otherwise. If you're accumulating a bunch of yardage and points because it increases your win probability, it doesn't mean you have a great NFL offense. If you have a high net rating because your opponent is getting 3 points every time, so they're allowing you to get 2 points every time, it doesn't mean you have a great offense. I just feel like the Knicks have been plus shot making in almost every single game aside from 2, I think, this year, meaning their offensive rating is not a function of them getting high efficiency shots or of the coaching staff running a highly effective offense. It's a function of the talent that they have on the roster and these players making difficult shots at an above average rate on a nightly basis, and of defenses allowing them to have shots, giving them the kinds of shots that they're happy for them to take because they're doing so well on the other end. The offense and defense are connected. There's context attached to it, and we can't just look at offensive rating in a vacuum and say the offense has been great. And I think I've seen that happening a ton all across social media and everywhere that people are talking about the Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, I'd give you a standing ovation, but then, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's really good. I do think one potential Steelman for a dissenting view, you're making an assumption here, in my opinion. You're making an assumption that the opponents are thinking like you would think, which could be a mistake. Like you're assuming right now that Rick Carlisle in yesterday's game was like, well, we're getting a 3 whenever we want, so we're more willing to live with these 2s. To be fair, we don't know that's true. The Knicks could just be producing these shots. They could just be very good at producing these really, really high efficiency 2s. In theory, I'm not saying that's true. Yeah. I'm just saying it could be true.
Just to address that really quick, that's a great point. I think that assumption is built into kind of the examples that I provided. I think in general that teams are happy for the Knicks to take these mid-range shots that they love to take. I think that that's just like a general principle. And I think that's what the defenses are built around. But I think that most NBA defenses are built around funneling shots that are lower efficiency shots. And those are the ones that the Knicks are taking. So I don't even think there's an adjustment necessary to create those shots. It's just like if the Pacers are not playing well or are not scoring, they may have to stop giving up those mid-range shots and start playing them a little more aggressively, and then you'll generate threes. But so I think the adjustment would come in the reverse end. But I agree with you from a just theoretical standpoint. That would be an assumption that's built into what I was discussing.
But even there, you referred to them as lower efficiency shots. And I agree that the shot locations that they're shooting from right now are in a vacuum lower efficiency. But there is a possibility that the Knicks are just really good at those shots, right? That's not impossible.
I think they're way better than league average at those shots, and they will continue to be. You have to destroy league average on those shots for it to make sense. I don't think it's sustainable what they've done so far from the mid range. And I mentioned this to a friend of the pod, Kevin Danishevsky, the other day. I think the high that I could find mid-range shooting for a year was 51% by the Phoenix Suns, who have like the most elite mid-range shooters like of all time on that team. And then there's never been a team that shot over 50% on mid-range shooting throughout an entire season that I could find in the last like 15 or 25 years, something like that. So yeah, you couldn't just be good at it. You'd have to be one of the best teams in the history of basketball at it in order for it to be worth it to take those shots more than threes.
Yeah. And I agree with this. I'm just...
Yeah. No, I know.
I definitely agree with that. It's interesting looking at the data and seeing Brunson, especially Brunson, the most important mid-range shooter they have. He's actually been running cold from that area. But then Hart and Bridges are preposterously above their heads in a in a way. It's an interesting discussion because I do agree with your general premise that, especially the part about how context dependent offense is. Coaches are playing to the game score. These games don't exist in a vacuum. I'm struggling a bit with the idea that just because these shots come from locations that are in a vacuum. Like, it almost seems like you're flipping it on its head here, because yes, in a vacuum, some of these shot locations are not the best areas to shoot a heavy volume from. But I don't think that necessarily means that Rick Carlisle or opposing coaches, I do agree that they are trying to funnel the opponent to take the worst possible shots or the lowest efficiency possible shots. I'm not sure that they agree with you that Jalen Brunson taking an open or slightly contested mid-range shot is something they're trying to funnel to. Maybe I'm wrong, though.
Oh, I think they definitely think that. I think they definitely think that, but I obviously am not in the minds of NBA coaches, but I think it plays out that way. And I think that it is known at this point that there's certain shots that teams are going to give up that are going to be okay with living with giving up. You have to give up something. You can't give up. You can't guard against everything unless you're a healthy OKC, and then you can guard against everything. But otherwise, no other teams can do that. So you have to give up something. And if you had to choose, it's going to be slightly contested mid-range shots. And I think every coach in the NBA would agree with that and live with that. So I have to imagine that's what their defenses are tailored to do.
I would hope so. I'm just maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. I guess what I'm saying is there's something elastic here that I can't wrap my head around. And, we always joke on this podcast about how you and I think so much alike all the time, and we agree most of the time. And I feel like if I'm struggling to fully capture it, maybe our listeners are as well. And I want to make sure we get to your point is fully sussed out so that our listeners can, at least, even if they don't agree, they can fully understand your perspective.
Yeah, I think one way I could talk about it is, like I said, the most important shots that you want to get are shots that are either uncontested or weakly contested at the rim. Those are the shots that you want to get. Do you agree with that? I'm sure you agree with that. All of our audience would agree with that. If you could choose what shot you would take, that would be the shot that you would take. We all agree. Mm-hmm. Then I think it is clear that the second best shot that you could probably take is an open three or a wide open three from a good shooter. From that would be the second best shot. If you couldn't get the first one, you would want to get the second one. Right.
You could actually make the argument, maybe, that a wide open three is better than a contested rim attempt.
Yeah, that's why I said weakly contested. But yeah. like a sort of contested rim, or a contest from a bad rim protector, effectively. So that's the hierarchy, right? So if we agree that that's the hierarchy, then the defense is going to be tailored to give up shots that are lower on that hierarchy. I think that is just true. I think every NBA defense is whether they're good at actually allowing that or not, that's what they're going to choose to do. So I'm saying here that I think that defenses are happy for whether it's by virtue of their creation in terms of what they're funneling the Knicks to do, or the Knicks choosing to take those shots of their own volition. The defense is happy with those outcomes, especially when they're scoring well on the other end. Now, if the Knicks had a lockdown defense, then I think teams would adjust. I think if the Knicks had a lockdown defense and the Knicks are just coming down every time and scoring from 2-point range with such consistency because they're easy shots for guys like Mikal Bridges, Jalen Brunson, who are elite mid-range shooters, Karl Anthony Towns, then I think defenses would adjust. I think they would say, oh shit, we got to take away this mid-range shot now too. And that would open things up for the Knicks to be even more effective. They get a ton of wide open threes. And that's something we saw from Luka Doncic-led Mavericks, is that teams were willing to give up wide open threes to stop Luka from getting those close in shots to the basket. They would say, oh, okay, normally with most teams, we'd be fine with a guy going ISO and trying to score, but Luka's too good at it, so we're okay with giving up the open threes. That's what makes Dallas so dangerous. The Knicks don't have that. And because of that reason, I think that teams would be totally fine with the shot selections that they take, and in fact would be happy with it.
So I think for me, just so we can close the loop on this, I think I'm struggling to fully marry the macro theory with I think your claim here, and I think it's the correct claim, is that the Knicks are running hot from the mid-range. Like, more than anything, I think that's what you're saying. That the Knicks are taking their overall shot location, field goal percentage relative to their relative to their offensive rating or what the data says their effectiveness has been. You're saying that those two things don't align, and eventually, if they keep playing this way, they will see regression, right?
That's not even necessarily my claim, honestly. Like, my claim is just that their defense is not good enough for the shots that they're taking to make them a team that wins with the frequency that we would expect from a team with their talent. So maybe they can continue to shoot this way. Again, they're not going to shoot over 50%, but maybe they can shoot 45% on the season. Maybe that'd still be a tough task, but I think they could because they have really, really good mid-range shooters and they're getting those shots relatively open. So I don't think that that's not possible. I just think that their defense is not good enough for that to be the best kind of shot that they take on a regular basis.
Okay. So that's your claim. I think what I was struggling with is I just can't wrap my head around a coach being like, yeah, they're making these, but their defense is so bad, we're going to win in the long term. And again, maybe I'm just not giving coaches enough credit. But I do think that your claim is a sound one, the one you just presented. And I think it leads to a question of that's on many Knicks fans' minds, which is, okay, we want them to shoot more threes and create more threes. How do they do that?
Yeah. So first I would say, like, I'm just imagining, and again, this is some assumptions happening here, but I would imagine if I asked Joe Mazzulla, like, this question, if we had this conversation with Joe Mazzulla, he'd be like, yeah, yes, I am happy for them to take those shots that I allowed them all to take in the first game of the season, because we're able to, like, stomp them on the other end. So I think so. Like you said, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe coaches aren't thinking that way, or some coaches aren't thinking that way. I'm pretty confident, like, the best coaches, I think Mazzulla, I think Dags, I think these guys are definitely thinking that way. Even Budenholzer, I think, is probably thinking that way. So then your other question, what was your other point? The way I think that they need to generate these 3-point shots, in my opinion, and I'm not a X's and O's expert by any means, but I think I'm a theoretical have an expertise in theoretical basketball. I would say that having no rim protector, but being able to protect the rim would generate open shots, because that would allow for these either uncontested or mildly contested shots at the rim from the guys who are attacking the paint. If that's the value, in my opinion, of 5 out with shooters all around, is that when you get to the rim, there's no rim protector there. The rim protector is guarding somebody who's standing at the 3-point line. So now those shots that we used to have to stop at the mid-range and were more difficult shots, now you can get closer to the basket. Especially if they switch and you have mismatches, you can still get all the way to the rim to get really good shots because there's nobody down there. You can pick out, and the Knicks seem to love matchup hunting, and I definitely think there needs to be more ball movement, more player movement. But at the end of the day, my opinion is that you can get better shots at the rim if there's not a rim protector standing there waiting for you. And that's the circumstance that the Knicks don't have because they don't play 5 shooters all at the same time.
Right. What if, hypothetically, they just don't have the personnel to even take advantage of the space in a 5-out setting? Like, what if you think about their non-Jalen Brunson players? Honestly, you could probably include Brunson in this grouping because he's flawed as a heliocentric option in a 5-out. Again, we've talked about this before. He seems to enjoy the muck. He's not a line drive driver. He's not the most gifted passer, and he's limited by his size. So, when there's nobody in the paint and he gets there, I don't think he's perfectly, thinking ahead and making these skip passes that you see Tyrese Halliburton do when nobody's in the paint and somebody's pre-stunting. And Halliburton sees the pre-stunt and says, "Okay, here we're gonna get you in rotation." I'm not saying Brunson won't ever do it, but I don't think he's doing it with the effectiveness that Halliburton does it. So you think about the Knicks personnel, and you have Brunson, who is he's flawed, of course. Every player's flawed, but in this specific regard, he is flawed. You think about Bridges and OG Anunoby, as I was talking about before, they're not exactly line drive, get to the rim types. Are they going to create a boatload of rim attempts because Deuce McBride is on the court instead of Josh Hart? Honestly, the one I think it would help the most is Towns. Towns is the biggest line drive threat the team has, I would argue. When he gets the ball and he has an advantage, that dude is dying to just get to the rim. He is probably the Knicks' biggest line drive threat. And then Deuce McBride, I wrote about it today. This guy, for whatever reason, you give him a step, you give him a good screen, he will not go straight to the hoop ever. He is determined to put a guy on his back or to stop at the mid-range and pull up. It's incredibly frustrating. It's probably his biggest flaw, in my opinion, as a player right now. He's 6'1". You know he's got skills around the rim. Why won't he just go straight to the rim ever? He doesn't want to create rim pressure. So I again, agree with you in theory. You know I agree with you in theory. You know I agree that ceiling basketball is played in a 5-out structure. But when we talk about zooming in and talk about the context of the roster, is it possible that this 5-out construction with Deuce McBride in for Josh Hart, the players are just too flawed and actually don't correlate with a 5-out scheme, and the ceiling version of this team is just playing a more 4+1 type with Josh Hart and emphasizing those strengths?
I think it's absolutely possible. And you make I wanted to comment on two things at the same time. It's absolutely possible, and you make a great steel man for it. I would say, if that's the case, if that's the team you've assembled, then they just messed up with their team construction. Then they blew it. Because that you're not going to have a good enough defense to offset what the offense not being able to be truly elite on that level. Then the team construction is bad, in my opinion. So maybe that's possible, and maybe that is true. But then this team does not have the ceiling that I believe that they do.
That is not the answer people are looking for, actually. Can we try again?
Well, the thing is, like, I don't think that is true, though. Like, I don't believe that. I obviously believe that this is, like, in terms of, like, the talent that they've assembled and the way that it fits together synergistically, I think that they do have a championship ceiling. I think that they do have a top offense in the league ceiling without having a terrible defense. I think they have a passable defense and a top 2 to 3 offense in the league on a consistent basis. And I do think that they have a championship ceiling with that. That's what I believe. But I'm saying, if you were to tell me, hey, actually guys like Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, and Karl-Anthony Towns cannot get to the rim and get good rim attempts with no rim protector at the rim and a good matchup defensively, then no, then it's not gonna. Then I don't think it'll work. Then if you're giving me that premise to start from, then yeah, it's bad. Then
well, let's just play this out. You know, we know that the Knicks are going to destroy, even with Josh Hart, anybody who plays drop coverage. They're just gonna. That's already been almost proven.
Yeah, the
teams that have given them the most trouble are the teams that are fine with Brunson isolating. What is your answer for these? Forget Boston, forget OKC. Nobody has an answer against them. You just got to grind it out. You're not going to have pretty offense against them. But what is your answer for a team like Indiana that's bad defensively? They're not good defensively. They were playing without Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith. They were playing without probably their 2 best Brunson stoppers. And yet still they were like, for the most part, we're going to just switch and live with this stuff inside the arc. What is your answer if Bridges, and especially OG Anunoby, we know he's not exactly a one-on-one creator. What is the answer then in terms of advantage creation against switch-heavy teams?
Yeah, I want to give an answer, but first I want to say something that you've said before, which is that I'm not an NBA coach, so I don't need to have an answer to this question. I need to just be able to understand whether there is an answer to this question. So if someone wants to posit that there is no answer to this question, and that if teams switch against this team, then they're just not going to be the team that we think that they could be, and they can't achieve a ceiling that way, then people are just arguing that, you know, this team is just too flawed in terms of the personnel that they put together and doesn't have a championship ceiling. That's the argument, because I don't believe that, and I don't believe that Tibbs is the perfect person to figure out all the solutions and answers. And if Tibbs can't figure it out, then there are none. I don't believe that. So if other people believe that, then that's just a claim that they have to make, and I think we'll find out. That being said, I think that there's a lot that the Knicks can do. I think that they need to kind of take off this barrier against being able to pass the ball for fear of turnovers, and be more fluid, have more fluid ball movement and player movement offense, because you can create more opportunities for advantages in the aggregate than you can with just one person isolating, if there's a lot of movement and activity going on and there's no rim protector. I think if you have both of those things, it's really hard for me to believe that you won't be able to create really high efficiency shots, whether it's shots at the rim that are mildly contested or open threes. I think that is a different type of system than the way that they've been playing. Right now, the way that they would attack those switches is purely to find the best mismatch and then to go one-on-one with those switches. And I think even if they did that, I think they would have better outcomes if there was no rim protector, because the spacing was a lot better than what we've seen in times over the course of the first 10 games. So those are my two broad answers, but I think that the NBA coaches should be able to figure something out. And if they can't, then again, the argument is this team is just not built for the highest level of achievement.
Yeah. I feel like this episode has just been me asking you questions and you've crushed it. So,
no, I do. It's really helpful, because I feel like like we talked about at the beginning, like it's more helpful to try to examine our views and if we have a hypothesis, to try to figure out why it's wrong, than to just try to reinforce it over and over again. So I think it's been really helpful.
I do want to ask one more thing just about your overall perspective here. So you brought up earlier that there are people who would be like, oh, well, the Knicks have the second best offensive rating, but you have to consider the context of, these things. And I thought you made a lot of good arguments. I remember you went on KFS before the 2023 playoffs, and you talked about the Knicks offense then because they had a really high offensive rating, and you basically compared efficiency versus effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And you ended up being right because, well, I shouldn't say you were definitely right, but the results played out as if you were right, because their offense went from second in the NBA to last amongst all playoff teams in those playoffs. Obviously, there's additional context there. We know Randall wasn't 100%, yada, yada. My question to you is, 10% or so of the way through this season, the Knicks are once again second in offensive rating. But this time, two of the factors that you leaned on in terms of trying to highlight why you didn't buy the offense, offensive rebound percentage and turnover percentage, the Knicks are down slightly. They're sixth in turnover percentage and down hugely in offensive rebound percentage, from top 3 the last couple seasons to 17th in the NBA. Play out a hypothetical where this level of effectiveness maintains, and they're not as reliant on turnovers and offensive rebounds, and the profile with which they're shooting remains. Would you change your perspective, or what would your overall view be then, were this to play out over a more meaningful sample?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a hybrid. So I would be much more ready to believe that this offense is good and really good than I would have in the scenario where it was built on the backs of offensive rebounding and low turnovers and some of those other things. So I think that if we see that play out over 70 games or something like that, I would definitely be more likely to buy into that as like it being real. But I also think that at the end of the day, what matters obviously is the interplay between offense and defense. And if their defense is just terrible, then it's going to be hard for me to believe that teams are like, not just like okay with them scoring their really high offensive rating, especially if they have like a 500 record. So I think that that's something that probably wouldn't change unless if their defense had improved as well and their offensive efficiency maintained as to what it was over 70 games. I would 100% switch that opinion, and I would say this is totally sustainable offense.
Cool. Yeah, I think just the last thing, is we're getting close to an hour for this episode on the Knicks alone. That's pretty impressive. The Knicks starting lineup, which we've talked a lot about this first month, they've played 161 minutes. They're scoring almost 121 points per 100 possessions. That's very good. That's good. They're allowing 122 points per 100 possessions. They have a negative net rating on the season. I don't think that's going to sustain. I think eventually, especially the Knicks have 5 games coming up, 1 at Philly with Embiid returning, and then 4 just a pretty big cakewalk, 2 against the Nets, 1 against the Bulls, 1 against the Wizards. I think we're going to start seeing the team turn around. It actually wouldn't surprise me if they were just 9-5 at the end of those games, if they just won 5 in a row. But I want to zoom in on the defense and Mikal Bridges. Do we think that Bridges is the point of attack defender to give this starting unit the adequate defense that they need to be a great overall lineup? Or do you think the Knicks are already having buyer's remorse with regards to Bridges?
I think he is, actually. So I think he is the right point of attack defender for the style that they're, for this defense. I think the issue is the scheme of playing in drop so heavily. I think they need to play other teams the way that teams are playing them defensively and be a lot more switch reliant. I think that the way that they played Indiana really didn't make sense to me at all. Like being afraid of Halliburton being able to switch onto Brunson or switch onto Towns. There were even a couple of plays. There was one play where there was a transition. There was a transition opportunity for the Pacers, and Halliburton kind of dribbled over to the wing, and Brunson was matched up on him, and then Bridges came over to try to take Halliburton from Brunson in transition, just left Mathurin wide open, and Mathurin hit a wide open 3. If they're so desperate to keep Brunson off of Halliburton, you're not going to be able to have a good defense. Like you can't give up everything in order to keep the matchup that you want. And that's what the Knicks seem to do. They give up everything in order to keep the matchup that they want. I think that we need to see a lot more switching. We need to see a lot more utilization of other defensive techniques, whether it's peel switching. We saw actually the Pacers do a really good job of peel switching in many scenarios, where it's basically where the offensive player blows by the defender, and instead of the defender trying to keep up with that player, just goes and switches off to the other player, and the low man takes over for the offensive player who blew by the defender. It's just an easier way to take advantage of the versatility that you have defensively, especially when you're playing with Josh Hart out there. You have 3 wing defenders who are all excellent. It doesn't make sense to try to keep them stuck on their matchup. They should all be kind of interchangeable. And I also think that Cat is not the worst perimeter defender in the world. He can at least put up some resistance in many cases. So I don't think that their approach to defense has been good, and I think that's something that they need to change. I think that if they do that, I do think Bridges can completely adequately do the job. I think he's done an excellent job in one-on-one scenarios. I think he's done a poor job when he's been screened, and that's what he struggled with the most, is his screen navigation. And if they just switch more, it'll resolve that issue almost immediately.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about separating those two aspects, but that does paint a clearer picture. Like if Bridges is really good in isolation and his biggest value is his switchability and his versatility as a defender, just really leveraging his length and just his size, and then you just completely remove his screen navigation, he's just immediately one of the best players in the league. I think defenders in the league.
I think his defensive impact doubles in that scenario.
Right. And that's just an example of something we talk about all the time. You have to adjust your scheme to the talent. You have to do that. That's, if you're trying to win a championship, there is no such thing anymore as a coach who is just going to run this same basic foundation, and the players have to adjust how they impact the game to the system. I'm not saying it's 100-0 the other way, but on a relative basis, you have to try and adjust your schemes to maximize the players and the talent that you have. There's such a wide depth of talent around the league. Other teams are just doing that, especially OKC and Boston. You have a team like Boston that is allowing simultaneously 5 players as good as Derek White, Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Kristaps Porzingis to all approach the maximal versions of their impact. You're not going to beat them by saying to Mikal Bridges, yeah, I know you'd have more overall impact playing this way, but you just gotta trail these screens and do this thing that you're not good at. It's not a win. It's not a championship formula.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I have always, and probably will always until something changes significant, that I will always believe that you have to more likely move your scheme and your approach and the way that you play on both ends of the ball towards the players that you have and the talent and the personnel that you have and their skill sets, rather than the opposite. And I think that there's just every piece of evidence in the world for that. And I think that it's really hard because players have such different skill sets and different strengths to be able to just say, we're playing this way and I don't care who the players are. And I'm not saying that Tibbs or this coaching staff believes that, but the way that they've played so far through 10 games seems to indicate that there's not as much of a aggressive shift towards the skill sets of the players that they have as I think that there should be. And we'll see if that changes. Maybe it's the 20 game mark that people keep telling me about, and maybe things will switch and they'll literally switch and do more switching, not just ball switching, but also like we talked about peel switching, nexting, all of those kinds of concepts. Maybe we'll see more of that.
You said peel. Every time you said peel switching, I just thought of Quickly. I missed him.
the king pill switcher,
the king
Emmanuel
of peel switching.
Emmanuel Switchley.
He was so good at it.
Yeah,
it's too bad It's too bad the NBA disallowed him from playing with Brunson. That would have been a heck of a duo.
Yeah, I don't know why Adam Silver did that. It was pretty grimy of him.
Yep, it's a shitty rule. He saw how good their net rating was when they played together, and he was like, "No, that is not allowed."
He Chris Paul traded it. All right, well, that basically was an episode of like testing XJ's worldview is what that was. But I thought it was really helpful, and I thought it helped me kind of think through some of the things. Like I think, and that's why it's great doing a pod with you, Geoff, because it's like, if there's anybody who's going to be able to think through like any loopholes or things that I'm missing or flaws in my kind of reasoning, I think it'd be you. So it was really helpful for you to challenge those things and make me think through it a little at a deeper level. Any last things you want to say before we kind of close out?
That's it. That was a top-notch episode. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Like and subscribe, please.
Please subscribe, and please leave a comment if you disagreed with things that I was talking about, that Geoff was talking about, that if you feel like Geoff could have asked different questions to challenge some of the things that I was saying, leave the comment to ask the question, and I will literally respond to it. So please leave a comment. We respond to every single comment, even if they're mean. If you want to leave a mean comment, you can do that, and I'll respond to that as well. But until next time, we have another episode. Our part 2 of this episode for this week is going to be about the Denver Nuggets. So if you want to watch that, I think it'll be actually released the following day from the time that this has been released, but it'll be coming out soon. So check that out. We're going to talk all about the Denver Nuggets and their great start so far somehow, and the person behind that great start. So we will see you on that episode. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. He is... You made me laugh, dude, because you said... Because I kind of stuttered over analytical, and then you smirked, and then it just fucked the whole thing. So we got to
get him next time. Get him next week.
All right.
Dude, we're rolling. This is the show. You just gotta go. Let's see your improv skills, man.
No, I gotta start over.
All right.
All right. This is hot hand theory. This is come on.
I need longer, dude. I couldn't keep a straight face. Fuck, man. All right. You hadn't even got to analytical. All right, third time's a charm. We got this.